Hello and welcome to a Sunday extra stream. And I'm here today with no co host, flying free, and with a guest, Alexander Adams, artist of some renown, probably foremost voice, and filled with all kinds of wisdom, I'm sure. Wait a minute. I've lost a verb in there. Uh, Alexander Adams, um, certainly a visionary and idea man for the future of dissident arts, at least for this generation, until we become ossified and replaced by the next round of dissident arts, who I'm already looking forward to. Alexander Adams, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. It's great to be back on the channel.
Oh, it's a pleasure. And I promise you, my openings will only become more unhinged as time goes on. But no, no. Let's talk. Lower it down a bit. You are fresh off of a very successful art show. Is that right?
Yeah, um, that's true. We had a terrific exhibition called Power and Intimacy, which ran in London for 1 week, and it's been down for it came down a week ago, so we're all still buzzing. You get that greater adrenaline high. You do kind of get a crash afterwards,
Mm.
but the crash is yet to arrive. But that's inevitable.
It's a natural form of things. I
Mm.
went to a new art exhibit by Anselm Kiefer, entered a religious artistic fugue state,
Mm.
possibly brought on by gin, and then proceeded to just blather on to somebody who didn't get it. About art and mystery and all these other things. It is a natural state to be enjoyed.
Yes. So we were. I think the basic idea about behind the exhibition was we were trying to get people maybe thinking about grander things, maybe religious, maybe not, maybe to do with nature, to do with their place in nature. They're taking a grip of their life and
Mm.
just hitting all of the points that contemporary art sponsored by the state avoids like the plague. So we were kind of like filling in that spiritual void inside, and it went really well. We had an amazing opening. Really, it was electric. We were just completely packed out. The gallery was completely full. We were out onto the streets, and like we had poets
Wow.
and novelists and historians, and we had millionaires and people who had no money, and yeah, all sorts of wonderful people. And it was lots of old friends and new friends, and it was really terrific. And the exhibition got a great reception overall during the week, which is so I'd like to thank on behalf of the whole group, the whole team. Thank you for everyone who came out, and especially to the invigilators who looked after the gallery while we were away doing our various things. So much appreciated to everyone.
Oh yes. I admit that I don't have much experience with these galleries and stuff. Um, I enjoy it when I find it, but here out in St. Louis, where even though we are a sector heartland, we're not exactly imperial heartland like, say, London or Washington, D.C. or L.A. is. So these things I enjoy quite from a distance, but someday I
Mm.
may be so lucky. I'll wear a turtleneck. I promise. I
Oh
promise.
well, that would be really good. I mean, we're I know that a lot of people wanted to come and they couldn't come. Even people in our own country, which is really small, smaller than one of
Mm.
your states over there, that they weren't able to travel down to London, and London's not a cheap place to stay, so I can kind of understand it. And I know that we have people over in Europe, and especially all the people we know in America who couldn't make it. So you're not alone. We had two artists from overseas. We had Harold Markram from America, and then we had Ryan DeFern from Australia. They couldn't make the show, but their work was there, and everyone's work got a really good reception, and people really responded to everything there. I don't think there was a piece there that I didn't hear a compliment about. So that's great.
I love to hear it. I do. Um, but sadly, it is now in the past. These things are like mayflies with it's in this case a life cycle to match. However, there are always more in the future. The real thing here is, of course, that we need to look to the present and even the future. But for
Mhm.
the present, you have a new book. I'm not quite done with it, but I have been enjoying it quite a bit. It is called How to Start a Dissident Art Movement. It is linked in the descriptions and the Twitter pages, at least the one I sent in. Certainly worth a read. I remember, I still have it near me actually, unrelated to this. Uh, the Naked Spur. Uh,
Mhm.
by yourself, which was the last time you came here, which is actually a book I do come back to think about. Um
No,
uh,
thank you.
Not often, but quite more often than a lot of other things I've read.
Mm.
Uh, but it's you have a very good way of words. You have a very good. I don't want to say economical, but it's a very good style. You get to the point. You don't prevaricate upon the verge, as I've heard said. Um,
Yeah,
over. Mm.
yeah. So, sorry, go on.
No, I was just doing various things I do as a hype man. I've been taking more sales jobs recently, and I don't
Hey.
know if I can turn it off. Uh, I might evolve into something more desperate, like a car salesman, or even, and may Allah forgive me for uttering these words, an art gallery salesman. Uh,
Don't
but
do it.
sell my soul. But no, it's a great read. It's a collection of your speeches. Is that right?
Well, it's a variety of things. So it's kind of so it's a collection of some of the speeches, especially stuff to relating to like a new art gallery, a new movement, a new sense of purpose, a new direction. And then there are a bunch of essays in there, some of which have appeared before, but some of which are completely new, and they deal with the problems facing artists. So it's like, what are you going to do about trad? What is this Anglo-futurism and national futurism that's sort of happening in America also? What are we supposed to think of that? What is the future for folk art, for localism, and different also things. I also got in like one of the pieces that's unique to this is 12 rules for artists. So that was basically, words of advice that I wish I had had when I was younger. It is quite possible that, knowing my bad memory, I may actually have had advice along these lines and not taken the advice. Now, actually, I know a couple are original to me, but yeah, these are probably common sense things that a lot of artists and a lot of creative people will have already absorbed. Because I would say there's a lot in this book that is not directed, that is applicable not just to fine art, that is to visual art. So this could be for writers, for composers, for actors, for people who make cinema, all sorts of people, anyone who's just sort of creative and wants to, and feels that they don't have a path through the traditional means, especially now they've been kind of co-opted by the state. So a lot of people feel disenfranchised, that they can't make the progress that they should be making. But one of my pieces of advice is not to blame your circumstances. It's to look inside and to see how you could do things better. Because before you start this dissident art movement, or your dissident musical movement, or your dissident, I don't know, chess playing movement, or whatever movement you're fancy founding,
I
look
only play
inside.
white.
Oh yeah, something came to my mind and I couldn't possibly say it.
No, no, I kid. Um, there, I one time I sell barbecues for a living, and I one time I often make jokes about being a certain kind of sauce supremacist, vinegar, brown, molasses, white, extra spicy, Tabasco. It's a good joke that gets a little bit of a chuckle, at least here in the land of the free and home of the brave. eagle
Well,
cry.
well,
Uh,
I would probably be I'd probably be arrested if I said anything like that here. You know what the state of things are here in Britain.
I
It's,
do, and I would never, of course, say it were I within the long arm or the reach of the bobbies.
ah,
Uh,
very wise.
yes, no, no, I speak over much. I speak over much. These things that you talk about, advice to young artists, it's so welcome. I talk to artists, young artists myself. You know, kids coming out of high school. They're directionless. They're stuck in an American context, in between, you know, having to get a job and work and career, you know, because even though money is not being distributed well within England, there's still money being distributed, and in
Mm,
America, it's so much less if you're not part of a major network
mm,
already or willing to sell your soul. So it's like they may, you know, you might see a few petted favorites like poodles in the arms of a rich woman. But in fact, that's maybe one out of 1,000. You know, I'm sure if an artist is immoral enough, he might lick a little bit of that art money that you talk about in your book. But in America, it's just not even that. Um, you know,
yeah, yeah.
mm,
So one of my things was, I was talking about like where are we going to get our money from, because every art movement needs money. I mean, even if it's just money to to eat, to keep a roof over your head, to buy materials. And I was saying, like you can do some work for the state, but don't rely on the state. And that also means the NGOs that are kind of affiliated to the state and the various arts bodies, which are kind of effectively arms of the government. You can do work with them. The chances are you're probably not going to get any work anyway. But I'm saying, like, don't rule it out. But the point is that you have to have other streams. You have to be connecting with collectors, connecting with your friends. So one of the pieces of advice is that, like, it's kind of find your tribe, find your people, the people who you want to work with, and that may be religious, it may be regional, it may be class, it may be racial, maybe you know national. I kind of suggest it shouldn't be national, because national is kind of really so super broad now. It just basically means anyone who's within the borders. And that's the way
yeah,
that governments kind of treat national. They just treat it as like, yeah, anyone who just managed to get through customs or cross a certain river or whatever, they're just as American or slash British slash Canadian as you. So I would say be careful about the national thing, but in other respects, find your tribe. And then I also say find your people, find your friends, and work with your friends and build up connections with them. Because I think one of my faults, one of my big faults that's really slowed me down, was believing in this sort of liberal, atomized view, romantic view, that, which actually you see in the novel, The Naked Spur, that you just mentioned. So the novel that came out earlier was all about me um, trying to exist on my own, but I was kind of just collaborating with a couple of people, but I was essentially working undercover. I was like an isolated artist. I was like an agent or a criminal, working in the shadows, and I had no affiliations and I had no loyalty, and I was just like a cat burglar or something. I was gonna get into the art world by doing this sort of this not this scam, because it was all selling. It was all real stuff. It was all actual, but it was like, it was like a plan to kind of get in under false pretexts and sort of astonish people with this great art. And that was a case of me, because that was essentially me in real life. That was a case of me kind of buying into the liberal outlook, the liberal worldview, which is, like, if you're good enough and you work hard enough, you will succeed. You don't need anyone else. You don't need to pay attention to the world around you. You don't need to think and consider society as a whole. You don't need to cultivate contacts. You don't need to connect with fellow artists and so forth. And I kind of fell for all of that, and all of that contributed to the way um, things went badly for me in my career. So that's a case of me just simply not understanding those kind of lies that we were taught at art college really don't exist. They don't help you. It makes you feel strong. It gives you a big ego, but
Mm.
there's nothing that ego isn't going to feed you, and your ego is going to feel pretty fragile once you fall flat on your face, which is what happened to me.
It's true, and I see it often in the writers I've interacted with. A lot of them, sort of pushed people away, and then maybe they are able to get a fan base going, but 9 out of 10 of them are disappeared. The like Ozymandias, barely remembered by people like me, with whom reality is permanent. Um, they return back to their day jobs. They're someone figures out some scam they were pulling, and they disappear. Like the only way to approach art and be truly worthwhile is to approach it honestly, I'd say.
Yeah, and I wasn't being honest about myself because I hadn't really examined myself, and that's something that only came much later in my life. And that's one of the things that went into the book, the new book, because I thought, well, these are the sort of things that I wish I'd been told, or I wish I paid attention to, because some people were saying this, some people were suggesting this. Um, so, you kind of buy into the certain bits of the mythos of art that appeal to you, and you sort of skate over the bits that don't appeal, or you think, oh, that's not going to apply to me. So, no, that was something that I did wrongly, and I wanted to put in the book, just some advice. It's like, think about what other people are thinking, try and make a connection, try and make a home for your art, because you could be the best artist in the world, but if you don't find homes for your art, when you die, it's all going to go into a skip. It's going to go into a landfill because there's no one there to look after it. There's no one, like like you can donate it to someone, but you know, they've probably got other things on their mind. They've got families, they've got businesses to run. They're not going to be
Yep.
the custodian of your museum, especially if you haven't bothered to try and make the artwork valuable. Because it's not self-sustaining. So don't bother donating it to a friend because that just passes on the problem to someone else. You're not helping them out. You're leaving them with a problem. So you need to start sorting this out while you're still alive. You need to start making your art worth something, worth keeping, worth preserving, worth selling on, worth publishing, worth going and seeing in an exhibition. This is all your responsibility. Later on, if you're successful, other people will take up that responsibility, but you've got to take the initial steps.
That's right. If especially with some authors, they may write 100 books, except they're all kind of slop sci-fi adventures. That may be good for an evening, but they say nothing except for maybe
Mm,
one or two scenes that are worthwhile. Um, they look at some people like Nick Cole, and then they forget that Nick Cole's probably the second greatest living grandmaster of science fiction after John C. Wright. And they think they can copy him and what Jason Ansbach do with the wildly successful Galaxy's Edge, which is, by the way, a fantastic read. Gods and Legionnaires is high art, but you can't do it. It's something more advanced. Like we, as weird as this is to say, and I know we have limited time, but it's like publishers are kind of coming back. Small boutique publishers.
mm,
Vox Day is finally getting his book, leathery bindery. Thank you.
mm,
Uh, Up and running, and let me tell you something. Those books are fun. Other people as well. Imperium Press, Old Sovereign, even Arc
mm,
House. With the decline of Trad Pub and uh, the zombification, I guess, of Bane books. It's one of those things where it's like we're finally hitting the limits. Nobody cares about emails as much as they used to. These paradigms. Amazon is choking out the authors, the
mm,
artists. There, you can't compete with an Indian slot merchant, guys. I'm sorry. Um,
mm,
it's just kind of like that, where it's like paradigm shift changes. Don't be a stick in the mud. Let's work with it.
mm,
That's kind of what I'm feeling with it. Like in the same way that you guys felt very confident in putting out your books and the Power and Intimacy exhibit. Uh, you know, there's something changing, and I like it. I like it a lot.
Yeah, well, thank you. I mean, it does feel like there's just a huge hunger that, you know, we got such a terrific response to the exhibition, um, because I think people are just, they're fed up of people complaining online. They want to see some action. They want to see. So we simply hired the space. We did the framing. We sorted out the transport. We put on the show. You know, we hung everything ourselves. We tweaked the lighting and everything, and we hosted the private view. And you can do it too. It's not impossible, but that's why I say you need friends. So you're not going to be able, if you're starting out as an artist, you're not going to be able to do this on your own, probably. You're going to need colleagues who you trust and people you want to work with, people whose art you respect. That's an absolute minimum. So you might not like everything they do, but you've got to respect their integrity and their capacity and their competence. So I think that, yeah, once you've got that and you've got the sort of, you don't even need a critical mass. You just need like sort of 3 or 4 people who you like and respect and want to work with, and you can put on a show yourself. I mean, it's possible to do a show on your own, but the truth is that there's very few artists starting up who would be able to create some sort of electricity or excitement over their first exhibition. Get together a group of people, and you're going to have like 3 or 4 times the amount of people just coming in through the door, coming to your private view, wanting to buy pictures, or at least considering buying pictures. You need that kind of collective action. And I think that too many people on the right, or, you know, in the center, you know, because I would say I'm sort of broadly in the center or to the right, or, you know, also a reactionary as well. I'm a mix of things. I would say that people who are definitely opposed to the left kind of dismiss collective action and say, oh, you know, that sounds like socialism. That sounds like, oh, you know, syndicalism or whatever, you know. No, to do any sort of meaningful action, you're going to have to be working with at least people that a small group of people who you want to work with and who you trust. So you don't dismiss the idea of working as part of a group. Yeah, there will be a time when you kind of you break free and you do your own thing, but then you'll be coming back. So yeah, I think that, you know, you just have to remind people on the right or people who are not on the left, yeah, think about how you can find your people and also work with your friends.
That's right. That's right. You know, yeah, especially for younger artists, you know, Isaac Young has done quite well for himself, mostly by himself. But at the same time, he's a uniquely driven individual who doesn't have many responsibilities, at least, you know, in the sort of, well, I shouldn't say, I don't want to be indiscreet. But, you know, he doesn't have a family or anything like that. You know, when you're young like that, or even like myself, you know, it's great, but you do need kind of, you know, friends just to do the labor. Like, what happens if you set up a whole exhibit yourself, and then it's like you trip and fall because you overburdened yourself and stick your head through your prized portrait? You know,
Yeah,
that's not how you do it. You know,
yeah,
you need some
yeah,
henchmen or
yeah,
something.
and absolutely, and we found when we were hanging it, you know, some of us had more experience with hanging, so they kind of like took over that. Someone had more experience with lighting, so they were naturally doing that. Another person was better on PR. Another person knew the right sort of drinks to get for the private view. You know, everyone's got their own special skills, and they can take up the slack. You know, so you know, like I was down in London for the whole exhibition, so it's down in there for a week, and I got so burnt out. I was doing interviews almost every day. I had meetings, there were events. It wasn't just the hang; it was the private view, and then I was meeting other people, and then I was doing interviews, and then I was, you know, rushing around, and I was kind of, and it got to a point where I was just completely burned out, and I had to take a day out just to kind of clear my head. And so the good thing was that we had invigilators and we had other artists there who were just able to cover that day, and they didn't need me, and they're just like, yep, okay, you do your thing, you get your head together. And then when I came back for the end of the exhibition, I was kind of refreshed. But I mean, you're right, it's absolutely the case. That's something you couldn't do on your own. It's just too exhausting.
Oh yeah. Like, advertising, I'll sell all day. You set me in front of anyone with something to sell, I'll just chatter on, answer questions, whatever. But then it's like, yeah, okay, Ben, set up an email list and contact these people with blind calls, and you'll just see me there going,
Mm.
no energy. I don't want to do this, but I'll have to do it. Um,
Yeah,
mm,
it is really super draining. And you know what? Guess what? Most artists, most writers are not social people. That's kind of why they choose the professions that they did. So you put them in a situation where they have to cold call people and they have to meet and greet people they've never met. They're not so great. They're not so hot on that. But it's a skill that you've got to develop.
yep.
You got to kind of toughen up, because as I said, it's down to you to find your channels, to find your collectors, to speak to your people, to speak to people who come, maybe 100 miles, 150
Hmm.
miles to come and see the expo. We had some people come from Scotland to come and see the exhibition.
Wow.
So, and that was incredible. So, you know, you're expected to step up and be polite and engage with them in a way that it comes hard to introspective artists. Although
Mm.
I gave one piece of advice. Another piece of advice I gave to artists is write letters. So
Oh.
maintain things at a distance. Even when you're not at these events, because these events happen like once a year or something, or maybe you have one or two exhibitions a year. So I would say, write letters, because it's a great way of not only maintaining connections with you and an artist, or you and a collector, or a writer, or a critic, or or just someone who's shown an interest in your work. It's a great
Mm.
way of sorting through what you think about in terms of what art you like, what art is important to you, what message you want to convey, what excites you, what you're just checking what the other person thinks of something or other. It's a great way of developing your skills and your intellect and your critical faculties is through writing letters. So actually,
Mm.
what I did in the new book, How to Start a Dissident Art Movement, I included a whole section of letters. So you'll see me kind of interacting with critics, with friends, with fellow
Mm.
artists, and you'll see how I talk to them and how I think about them, and also what I'm thinking about art, and me coming up with ideas. So I think that that's something that people should perhaps take on themselves and start writing more letters. I mean, like actual physical letters, not just emails.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. That is fantastic. Well, and I've got a typewriter. I
Yeah,
guess.
me too.
uh, so sorry, I'm formulating my question. Critics is something that's brought up quite a bit,
Mm.
and quite frankly, I don't know any right wing art critics who are actual like critics. I mean, do you? I might just be a troglodyte in my little American cave, but is there something I'm missing here?
Um, you're right. There's so few that you could be forgiven for missing them, and they're also the sort of people who might be saying, well, unless they're super trad, in which case they generally don't review contemporary art. They stick to historical stuff, which is
Hmm,
kind of understandable. But I think if you mentioned it to, I could think of a couple of names. They won't thank me for naming them, so I'm not going to name them.
never mind.
But
Yeah,
if
of
you, but
course.
if you, but if you put it to them that they're right wing, they're just like, no, I'm just, I just don't. I don't go along with the political stuff that's pushed through state art or through NGOs or through the Pulitzer Foundation or whatever, the Ford Foundation. I don't
Hmm,
go with those. So they wouldn't see themselves as explicitly right wing. So I think that's perhaps why one or two might be slipping under your radar, is just because they don't kind of call themselves that. And I think if you started to call these critics right wing, I think they pretty soon write a kind of harsh review just to kind of distance themselves and show, no, I'm independent. You don't get to label me, which is fair enough. I don't
yeah.
necessarily like being labeled, and a lot of people don't. So yeah, I think also the fact that most publications are owned or funded by people who are kind of left of center. Even so, even though you've got like legacy millionaires, so like their father founded a newspaper business and whatever, and so they've kind of inherited a lot of money. They explicitly make a point of being left wing or liberal, or supporting causes. Like you can think of all those oil millionaires.
Yes.
Their children, their scions, end up funding sort of Just Stop Oil and political activists and stuff. And there's I'm not going to name her, but there's quite a famous patron of the arts whose father was considered a right-wing person in the media and had a lot of money, or still has a lot of money. And she has made it her life's work to sort of push feminism and so forth, which is, it's her right. But the problem is that means that a lot of publications that might have a diversity of views are monocultural. It's all liberal or all left. You're not going to get very much. Luckily, I think the ice is breaking a little, but it's still early days. I mean, it's mad. I mean, I've been in this area for so long, but we're still yet to get really, really sort of, I don't know. I mean, there's a couple of publications over in Britain, for example. There's something called The Critic, which does put out some dissident and right wing and contrarian views. So that's definitely worth checking out. But they're not explicitly anti-regime. They're not explicitly right wing.
Right.
So yeah, there are murmurings. There are people around. Also, I think a lot of this stuff is happening on blogs. So you're not getting it aggregated into publications, which means that unless you're hunting it out, you're not going to find the specific individuals who might be providing that sort of right wing or sort of right of center view.
I got you. And maybe my question was indelicate.
No.
These things are best. I was joking about it a minute ago, but with the state of Britain and stuff like that, it is probably better to hide the hat. And besides, if they are a good critic, they'll be contrarian anyway. So
yeah, I worked as an art critic I mean, I still do it occasionally, but I worked as an art critic for quite a long time. I mean, I trained as an artist and I'm a proper artist, but I just happened to do some writing as well. And as a critic, I always wanted to present something fresh. I didn't want to sort of toe the line. That didn't mean I would necessarily say, oh, Titian and Rembrandt, they're rubbish. So I mean, that's stupid. They are great artists. They've got faults, but they're great artists. And so you don't do yourself any favors just by saying stupid things to be a contrarian. But I would try and come in with independent views, and I would deliberately not read what the other critics had written about an exhibition. I would go in and see it afresh and give my view. And I know, looking back in retrospect, I know that made my work perhaps more distinctive than the mainstream critics. And one of the things I say in the book actually is I talk about the next steps for an art movement. And part of that is critical apparatus. So we need critics. So we need publishers. We need all sorts of things. We need galleries. We need museums. We need publishers. We need critics. We need salons. We need venues. We need like bars where you can hang out with dissidents. So there's movement in that area as well. And I think critics are definitely one area where we could do with more independent voices.
And this is something I'd been thinking about for a while, and perhaps we will have some offline conversations about it in the future. But for now, we'll set that aside. Critics are definitely something that's needed. There's almost nothing in literature, certainly, who's doing it more than reviews, which is not quite the same. Don't get me wrong, a good review can really sell a book. I have several friends who my review of their books, like Netherreal by Brian Niemeyer, is just something they come back to. I wrote it like it was a Juggalo opera. You may not know who the Juggalos are, but they're very American. They're clowns, kind of cultists with a good deal of meth.
I have heard tell of them.
Yes.
10 years ago, I believe. Are they still around?
Kind of. Not the same. But like he remembers that because it was such a long and complicated book that I could think of no way to shorten it than to write a short comic opera about it, or a description of a comic opera. But it's like that sort of thing. Yeah, sure. But it's like for myself, it's been frustrating because I can't find any criticism of my short stories, except that, wow, this certainly didn't belong here. Why? It just, no. But it's that's one thing we need for the dissident art movement. We've talked about the new artists coming in. Where would you say another need is in general?
um, yeah, I would say I'm not going to talk about funding because that's too easy because that's the obvious thing that people would go to. So I would say venues, galleries. So
Mm,
we did ours independently, but there's a huge potential for gallerists who are willing to be independent and brave, just to step in and sell, exhibit and sell the work on their own, without without necessarily a express political position, but just simply allow dissenting artists, and I don't say necessarily dissident artists because that kind of conjures up the idea of a right wing thing, but this might be left wing as well, or sort of super trad, or people
anti-regime.
anti-regime, or outsider artists, all sorts of things like that. There's a whole broad spectrum of people who really don't get very much of a look in through the state funded arts. So let's have more commercial galleries. Now, obviously,
Mm.
this is a big risk. I was speaking to someone at the venue during the exhibition, and he was saying, like, oh, are there any galleries doing this? And I said, well, in Britain, not really. I can name you, a couple throughout the world, but it's very, very few. And he said, well, maybe that's me. And I said, well, like if you're discriminating, and because our exhibition sold really well, we sold, like about 80, maybe over 80% of the work sold, and
Wow.
not for low prices as well. So I said to him, look, you know, this is a special event. There's been real buzz over this, but if you play your cards right, you could put on exhibitions by these artists and other artists, and and galleries traditionally take 50%. So you would, a gallery playing its cards right could do pretty well doing this sort of stuff. But at the same time, I didn't want to sort of tell him, oh, you should definitely go into this, because it's a huge risk, it's a huge gamble, and a lot of galleries do close down. It's like restaurants. Restaurants have a huge failure rate within the first year or two
Yeah.
years. And I should have, and from my experience, if you look through if you buy one of my catalogs and you look through the back, there's a list at the back of all the exhibitions I've done, and then if you look through them, it's like an obituary, because every one of those artists, every one of those galleries has kind of died. But that's not me killing those galleries, honestly, Gov. It's a question of those galleries having a relatively short life, or also people doing it for 10 years, 15 years, and then they retire.
Mm.
And it's not necessarily the sort of business you can take over coming in as a sort of deputy. I mean, it does happen, but a lot of these things are personally driven. So when the art dealer retires, their contacts kind of disappear. They disappear into the mist. They don't get passed on to the assistant who takes over the gallery. So, but I did talk to this chap, and I said, there is money to be made if you're willing to take a little bit of a risk. So I would say, yeah, one thing we need is some commercial dealers who are going to come in and hold the sort of exhibitions that we held, but do it year round.
Yeah. I like it. Hmm. It's one of those things where, yeah, I'm saying I like it, but it's like, uh, to do it, you'd have to have a space. You have to have a
Mm,
discerning eye. If you're not
mm,
in what I call an imperial heartland, you
mm,
will have to convince artists to move towards you, or at the very least, be willing to transport their goods. And transporting art is very expensive. You
mm,
probably can't afford it. Um, at least from like, let's say I purchase a thing, $1,000 a month. Some guy just wants a shop filled for a year. uh it's like, what can you do with that? Like, show
mm,
off 10 to maybe 15 pieces. But in St. Louis there are some very old money, but they
mhm,
would have to find out about you. They would have to be willing to, come and see. And don't get me wrong, if you were to flip a coin, I'd say the coin would fall a little bit on the right side than the left, not by much, but just a little, 51% we'll say, but so it's like they wouldn't be offended by somebody being a dissident artist. They understand these things, but it's like it's still, you know, there's no path to success except selling the artist's work.
Yeah.
In a place that, while not hostile, St. Louis does have a very good art community. An art community exists, I should say, that is active. Um, that's not the same as uh, having an industry for art.
Yeah, and also you've got to remember that different countries function differently. So in Britain, for example, we're a relatively small country and we're pretty centralized. So essentially, almost all of the commercial galleries that do serious stuff or interesting stuff, most of them are based in London. And there's relatively little that happens in other cities, and there's almost nothing that happens in sort of country venues. So and also it's the same in Paris as well. That's a super centralized country, even though it's, I think, in land mass it's probably larger than Britain. I can't remember. But obviously in the United States, it's different. You've got the East Coast, you've got the West Coast, you've got Chicago, you've got sort of places which are large enough to have enough gravity to attract local artists and to attract local collectors and retain them. This is something that's not going to be possible in all sorts of places. I mean, I would, St. Louis is pretty small. Well, it's small compared to Chicago or somewhere like that.
Oh,
I'm sorry. I mean, is that wrong? Have I
oh.
calculated it?
You compared us unfavorably to Chicago, our
Oh, you don't.
mortal
I mean,
nemesis.
no, no, no. You're much more niche. You're much more boutique.
Oh,
There you are. You
oh
see. So,
my!
there you are. That was a
I like
disguised
that.
compliment. I'm walking it back. But you see what I mean. It's like,
Yes, I do.
okay, right. If you're running a restaurant, okay, that's something different. Like you
Hmm.
can be a regionally renowned restaurant in pretty much any part of the country, and you'll make a living.
Yes.
Having a gallery, it's like, well, ooh, you got to pay for you either buy the property or you're renting the property. You're paying your business rates on top of that. You're paying for probably paying for staff, you're paying for electricity, you're paying for the internet, you're paying for
Hmm.
advertising. Certainly, well, even if you get successful, you're still paying for advertising. You're paying for staff.
Hmm.
You know, and that's all before you've sold the first picture. And your first picture is, well, like, what is it going to be? $1,000, $2,000? I mean, and think of how many of those you've got to sell.
Yep.
So it's a big risk. So that's why I said to this young chap, you know, there's a potential. Early adopters. There's a big potential. It's a gamble. You might come out a winner, but it's a big risk. And I wouldn't necessarily advise anyone to start something like this if they weren't seriously committed or if they didn't have some sort of financial backing from somewhere to help them out to start with.
Yes. That's a good. That's a good point. Uh, we've talked around money, but these things do cost money.
Mm, yeah.
As much as I'd like to, abandon everything and become a eccentric art show guy. Um, I'm already got the eccentric part down. The It's just not financially in the cards for me. I have to slog it out. I joke that I'm a starving artist who likes to eat, therefore I work. Um, it's like I've read some books, in the past where people describe living on their own, working on manuscripts and stuff like that, and then they describe, oh, I only spent £1 a month or something in 1850, for a garret, and this
Mm,
and that, and it's like those days aren't here, like, and
no,
not that I consider a pound anything like a dollar, but
no.
even then, the dollar used to mean something too. So it's
Yeah.
like, these times are ours, but I'm looking back over those housing prices.
Mm. And that's one of the things that happened. I don't know if I mentioned it in the novel that I wrote, and it was like, perhaps, I mean, it might come up in some future thing, but when I was living in London, it was immediately between the boom of the young British artists who started out around 1990 and kind of the hollowing out of London, the kind of collapse which happened in the 2000s, late 2000s, where things became unaffordable and you couldn't get a studio. We have such a housing crisis that lots of industrial spaces or post-industrial spaces that could be used as studios, and in some countries they are liberally used as studios, are not available because they're getting converted or they're getting demolished for apartment blocks. So what happens is that in the old places where artists used to be, I did mention it in the novel. I talked about the new landlords wanting to
You did.
kick out the artists out of this block that they bought. Um, and what happens is you see a sort of hollowing out. You end up in basically in a trading estate, like 20 miles away from the center of a city. And it's like, if you're living close to that and you're working close to that, you're really not in the city at all, are you? You might as well be living out in the countryside or in a different town, and you'd
Yep.
actually probably be better off there. So, you're not participating in the life that we think about when we think about like Picasso and the surrealists, because they were hanging out in these cafes and bars in the left bank in Paris, and they were all within walking distance, you know, or maybe like a
Hmm.
short cab ride or something. So they were actually interacting on a daily basis, or they could if they wanted to. I mean, a lot of the time they were at home doing their own thing, but they could meet up. They could go into the centre. Their paths could cross by accident. They would all hang out at the same private views and stuff. And you don't have that now because people are so atomized in not just simply through liberalism, but through economic situations. The force of their circumstances means that they're just not they're not within close range of potential colleagues. So it's a great loss, and that means that people are not forming the friendships and not making the allyships that they had previously.
That's right. Just thinking of St. Louis, certain gentlemen, are in North St. Louis. Other gentlemen are in of artistic or pro artistic means, um, are in uh, Southwest. An
Mm,
hour away from the first. We had a club meeting of a kind. A gentleman came in, from like half hour away, 45 minutes away. You can't really party. You know what I mean? Like it's
mm. Oh
like
yeah,
that. Like
it's
the
not a
old.
casual undertaking to meet your colleagues
Mm,
now.
no, no.
Mm,
And like thinking of like where the rich folk live, there's some up in the north, and across the sea, across the river in Alton. There's some in the Cahokia Mountains. There's some near the Anheuser Busch, which is centrally located, a wonderful location in Soulard for such things. And there are some artistic things here of a not pro dissident nature, and then you have the art museum nearby. But then it's like then you jump again, it's another 15 minutes to half an hour to the next set of high class folks who might buy art, who never go into the city. They would rather die because they believe they will die. But it's like that. Like it's what might be 15-20 minutes on a tube on the tube,
mm,
is in fact for us half an hour or more driving, which is
mm,
not just sitting there in the tube, reading a book or chatting with your friend. It's it's effort to drive, even though I'm always pro car. So it's
mm,
like, yeah, like somehow some way to get a scene going. In New York and Los Angeles, which even though you wouldn't use the public transportation, it has it, is something easier than, St. Louis, where the public transportation is not that as developed for good or ill. Um, Listen, I've had
mm.
some arguments with some black Israelites on some buses, and I am shocked I didn't get stabbed. But it's like that I think better than money is in fact venue, as you said. I was like I think I got angry at academic agent because he started talking about how, you never had like scenes in history. But then it's like, yeah, you had the surrealist scene, you had the futurist scene, and you
Mm,
had those cafes in Vienna that Hitler, Lenin, Stalin, young Freud, all these guys who are names that even like completely
yeah.
illiterate people know,
Mm.
hung out in drinking coffee,
Oh,
you know.
absolutely. So I mean, like Vienna. I mean, like a lot of the Vienna secession, like happened in sort of 1890s and so forth. All of that happened, 1900 and so on. That happened because these artists were meeting up and they were like, I didn't get my thing accepted for this by the jury for this exhibition, or I didn't get my thing published, or I didn't win the prize, or I didn't win this commission, or whatever. And they were seeing each other and they were talking and they were saying, well, let's do our own thing. Let's get together. Let's form our own organization. And all of them, and also because Austria is a really tiny country, so everything is super centralized in Vienna. They were crossing each other's paths all the time, and this you could say the same about Paris. You could say the same about London. If you read the autobiographies or the memoirs of various people from the beginning of this century or from the last century, the Impressionists, there was always sort of stories about people bumping into, Degas walking down the street. You're not. um, I mean, I don't know if anyone's ever bumped into Jeff Koons in the street. I don't, or Marina Abramovich. I don't know, but
Absolutely not.
um, I've got no idea. Yeah, sorry, there's all sorts of images coming to my mind now, but yeah, you did have a scene. You did have physical places where you could go. And that's something actually that Fen de Villiers, one of the artists who works with us, who's part of this group, he was saying, like, what if we could get these bases? If we could get just like a house in get a house in, 6 cities across the world, and in those houses you'd have like a place to live, you'd have a studio, you could have a place where the artist, and you could invite artists, and they could actually live there and stay there for a month or 2 months, and then there'd be like a display space. You could have an exhibition, or you could screen films, or you could do poetry readings, or you could have a small debate or a book launch or something. If you had those little hubs, that would make all the difference, because you'd find that everyone in that city who was a dissenter, a dissident, someone who wanted to talk about things in a free way, they would have a hub. That would be a place where they could go and they could physically meet, leading figures who were coming from outside. So a poet or a novelist or a musician or whatever, they could actually come to this place, and people would know, oh, that guy's gonna do a talk, or that woman's gonna give a demonstration of a particular art technique or something. And there'd be real excitement, and there'd also be a sense of exchange and a sense of community. So although you'd have your own local art scenes and your own national concerns, and those people would be there all the time, you'd have these bases which would allow, the elite, the influencers, the thinkers, the great artists, the great musicians, the great creators, to be in those spaces for a prolonged period of time and have a meaningful interaction, rather than just simply being at the local Radisson hotel at the airport and getting a cabin for an event and then disappearing.
I mean, yeah, that's a great way to put it. It's like you can't really do places like that in like say center New York City, like or Soho or wherever. It's like maybe in St. Louis. I could see bringing in some people in, but again, we run into the problem of that would probably be good for like St. Louis elites, who do fund the arts. Our St. Louis Art Museum is worldwide. We just brought in Anselm Kiefer for Pete's sake, for a huge groundbreaking exhibit. It's amazing. It sent me into a fugue state. Like, come on.
Mm.
Uh, but it's like, would people be willing to make that investment to say, okay, guys, as much as we love London, you know, could we remove to, what's a small city outside of London that would be
Well, Well,
Um,
I'll give you an example of like there's an artist colony in St Ives, which is in the Cornish
mm,
Peninsula, which is kind of like 300 miles away from London. So yeah, you had artist colonies, and you could
yep.
have your base there. However, I think that being in some sort of city, you're right. So if you were in, I don't know if you were in Cambridge or Manchester or Bristol or something, that would be kind of almost better. But the problem with Britain is that so many people are in London, or all the transport is arranged to get to London. That's where most of the airports are. All the trains go through London, pretty much. So I think that would kind of be a natural place to have your hub. But yeah, I mean, having it outside, like having it in a smaller place. So, like for example, if you were in Belgium, you could have it in Ostend rather than Brussels, which is the capital. You could have it in St. Louis instead of Chicago or New York. Yeah, absolutely. That would be
Oh,
terrific. Mm.
it's yes. Again, but actual yeah, it's uh, yeah. I do want to cover one more thing on the book that I did read that I found quite excellent. A great summary of the work. This is in the New Impressionists chapter. Um, Essentially, there's some qualifications and principles that a successful art movement should have. Sorry, I'm going to real quickly summarize.
Mm.
Generosity. Um, some people are more skilled, more original, and so extend to others to share and not like keep people out. Seriousness, being serious about the principles. Ambition, overcome the ideas, individuals, institutions, discredited through force of our own courage and achievements. Solidarity, we'll talk about this one in a minute. Quality, which is, of course, very difficult. I'm an editor. I
Mm.
edit short stories. I edit my own short stories. I am a very good editor. However, to keep a standard of quality when you're on a crunch is incredibly difficult. Um, and at some point, you just have to accept this is as good as it's going to be, and just kind of hope that nobody is too disappointed. But for a portrait, um, someone may spend a minute, walking through, but if you're looking at a gallery and there is something incredibly ugly, jarring,
Mm.
thrown against the wall and is actively dying at your feet, you might not even go back to the gallery.
Mm.
Independence, stay away from the quasi state and the state organizations. Authority, as authority leaders, renewal of arts depending on exercise of the above principles, truth over values, personal conduct, and the quality of the work. We need to toughen up. And I don't mean in the sense of, and I'm sure you don't mean, I mean, in the sense of, oh, you got to pull up by your bootstraps. Uh,
Um, by and large, no, but you do have to be less. Yeah, you can't blame other people. You've got to kind of
mm,
take more responsibility for yourself. But yeah, I mean, like it. Yeah, you're right. It's not just a sort of you're the cause of all the problems. Like you do have to rely on other people. You do have to form a network. Yeah.
right. And it's like I'm basically saying you're not doing the boomer, oh you're not being successful, pull yourself up by your
No.
bootstraps
Oh
kind of thing.
no.
Solidarity was the one that kind of stuck out to me
Hmm.
because it's definitely something I've fought against and bashed my head against even recently, where artists will just snipe at you because of politics. There's actually a generation of artists who hate on the younger generation of artists for no reason, and it's very weird, very gamma, to use a social sexual hierarchy. They don't advertise the work, and then they're shocked when I say I haven't earned 1 cent off of it, despite being an editor of a whole anthology. How dare I? How dare I demand money for my work? Uh,
Yeah.
hmm,
Yeah.
but
So yeah. So I get your point that the solidarity thing is like we. So it's like if when you get together with your friends, you have to have a degree of solidarity with them. Like, that's kind of a given. But you've also got to be kind of generous towards people in your sphere, people who work in the same direction. Now, you're not always going to agree with their ideas. So, for example, I've kind of said I don't believe that making super traditional work or taking up the trad aesthetic is the way to go. I think that you need something more original and something more slightly rooted in your time. So not gimmicky, not sort of current, not the current day approach, but you've got to have something of real existence and real life. Otherwise, it's not going to it's not going to be authentic, and b, it's not going to resonate in future times. So, what's
Yes.
exciting for us for about certain artists is something that sometimes you can often see something that's particular to their culture, to their to their situation. They're using um, contemporary costumes for biblical scenes, so they're not going
Yes.
back and trying to do something super authentic. They're kind of like using their own costumes. They're setting it in their own buildings. So it's so when you see Christ in the house of Martha, the house is not like a sort of a 0th century house that you would find in the Holy Land or whatever, in Judea or whatever. It's a Dutch building, or it's
Mm.
a French building, or it's an English cottage or something like that. You've got to have something of your own time and own place in it. So yeah, you have to have solidarity with your group and also with people more broadly. But that doesn't mean that you have to praise what they do. I think I would just simply say, speak generally about the aesthetics and differences that you have, and
Hmm.
then not go after them, not criticize them personally, not demean them, not mock them, not poke fun at them, not sort of delight when they have financial problems because they can't sell work or anything, because that's just petty and stupid. But the
Yes.
best thing to do is to maintain a dignified silence and just try and open the door to anyone who's really good and really determined, and they will come through after you. So you might break the ice, but the people coming afterwards, you need to be thoughtful about them. You need to have a degree of generosity towards them, and generosity is one of the other points in the list.
That's right. And that's a good way to put it. From our American standpoint, it's much more, Wild West, like, oh ho, partner. But in the English mindset, from my mother, there's a lot more, quietly getting along. Frankly,
Mm.
the frontier eras are over, and the frontier era of new pub with Amazon is dying. The train's coming in, partner,
Mm.
which is a motif in westerns, showing the encroachment of civilization upon the uncivilized.
Yeah,
Um,
and I would say also, if someone does something that you respect, even though it's not something that you like, and they're part of your movement, your group, your outlook, it's right to praise them and to say, like, thank you for doing that. I think you've done really well. Congratulations and stuff like that. You don't snipe about them, and you don't backbite and stuff, because it's just that's petty, and also, I don't think it's a good human thing. So it's if you're a Christian, that's certainly that's something that you would avoid doing anyway. But I'd say that in political terms, it's people say, oh, no enemies to the right or no enemies to the left. If you're on the left, and I would say, no enemies. I mean, you have disagreements, but don't make enemies out of people who are largely sympathetic and largely working in the same area and working towards the same goals and have the same values, even though it expresses itself in a different way, a different aesthetic. Don't fight against them, because the truth is that the sort of the liberal, secular, left wing, progressive behemoth as it's kind of squatting on the government, and it's squatting on all the state institutions and all the universities and most of the mass media and stuff. That's the stuff you've got to worry about. Don't get into slap fights with some guy who's shares 90% of your views and is sitting right next to you. That's stupid.
that's right. That's right. And I think, especially since more of points that we've discussed, even though the language isn't universal, is the more it spreads, I think the better off we'll be. the big benefit of the left has been its collectivism. They
Mm,
will defend their own. Oh, you bombed a bank? Oh, my friend, come into my house. I'll make sure the pigs don't get you,
yeah, yeah.
etc.
We kind of over the water here, over the pond. We did notice what happened with people regarding Charlie Kirk. We did notice
Mm,
that um, there was very few little condemnation on the left of what is presumably the killer who was also politically on the left. So we did notice that.
yes. Uh, but I think as time goes on, I think we'll do it more and more and more. Like I was speaking to a man at church, and like I said, oh yes, we don't talk too much, and I meant to approach him about something, and he's
Mm,
like, yes, we don't talk too much, but and he approached me warmly as an American does with his friends, and I said, listen, you're my friend until you prove yourself my enemy, and he's like, yes, I love it. The very idea of friend enemy distinction, merely saying it adds it to another man's lexicon. It's why I try to speak as openly as I can. Not only do I want to show my bona fides, bare my breasts, to I'm losing weight, I swear, bare my chest to the slings and arrows, but also to to make sure that other people know that hey, you can talk about this.
mm.
You can think about artist stuff. That's half the reason why I like having you and others on to talk about your books and stuff like that.
Well,
Um,
sorry. Oh, no, good. Go ahead.
yes, go on, go on. I was.
Oh, yeah. With that, I was just. I think that one of the things you learn is as you grow older, you have to embody your virtues. You
Mm,
can't just talk about them. You can't just advocate them. You have to live them. And I've fallen short of that in all sorts of ways. And I've spent, much of my adult life not living up to the things that I said that I believed in, and it's a tough thing. Once you admit that, you have to be super humble, and that doesn't necessarily mean flagellating yourself or sort of going into autobiographical detail in podcasts and stuff. But
mm,
you do look at yourself and you recognize that I have not been doing the things that I believe in. I've not been living up to the things I've been telling people. And there's something I say at the beginning of the book. I said, if I have taken my own advice that you find in this book, I would be both a better man and a better artist. These are things that I would I aspire to. This is my advice to you. This is what I've learned. This is not necessarily what I've been able to live up to. I've fallen short of it so often, and I think that once you're self-aware, you understand these things, and you understand that it's something that you have to work towards, and you have to accept responsibility for lapses, for being
hmm
weak. And I think that like I think if you do have a religious turn of mind or something, you're aware of man's inherent sort of predilection for sin, or at least for sloth or laziness or lack of introspection or sort of self-deception. I think that once you are aware of that, you start to see it in yourself, and you know that these things have to be corrected, and they can only be corrected by you. They can't be corrected from outside, and you have to want to change as well. So these are deep things that you have to think about before you start your own dissident art movement.
it's true. Well, uh, that this has been a fantastic podcast. I only really like spending an hour on these ones, but I'm more than willing to talk to continue to talk. Continue if you have something more you want to say or things you want to advertise for.
Yeah, well, I'm happy. I'm happy that we've covered most of the basics of the book and the exhibition, because they kind of went together, and we had a fantastic response to the book. So we're actually selling copies of the book in the gallery. So we had people coming in and sort of buying the book and saying like, okay, yeah, I heard you kind of had this plan about how to do an art movement, and it's like I'm here in the exhibition and I'm kind of seeing you exhibit your work. I can see your work, so I can see the work of your colleagues, and it's kind of like proof of actually going ahead and doing it. And that was terrific to sort of have people coming in and saying that and seeing the connection between the book and the exhibition, and also the novel. We only had a couple of copies of the novel, which sold out really quickly. But people who knew about the novel, it's like, yeah, that's kind of like you at your lowest point, because it's basically based on my experience. So the Naked Spur is about the lowest point, and the following book is How to Start Dissident Art Movement, and that's about what I hope I can do, and what I hope other people can do, and what I've learned, and what can help you start your own art movement, or your own sort of, or you just like your own local group, your own local cooperative thing, your own, um, might just be a book group or something stupid like that. But it could be as grand as an art movement which is going to be as great as the surrealists or the futurists or the romantics, or some of those other great movements. So I mean, it's so actually everything this year has kind of led up to this point. So the first the novel, then the other book, with the manifestos and ideas, and then the exhibition. So it's been a really intense year.
Oh yeah, and I love hearing about it. People underestimate how good remoralization feels once you really start showing some gratitude and looking at successes and stuff like that. You wake up every day and see another person murdered on Twitter over, and then released on political means. You're going to get demoralized, my lad. Um, I live in St. Louis, one of the most dangerous cities in the Union, and yet, I've only had a gun pointed at me once. And then, of course, someone says, "Well, that's not normal either." It's like, oh, hold on, you know, the crime's just
Statistically, people have to have guns pointed at them for it to be one of the most dangerous places in the country. So yeah, there's a good chance that there's going to be guns pointed. Yeah.
yes. Uh, but yeah, you know, it's what my hope that people will watch this, listen to this, get inspired, get your book. Are there future projects we should look forward to?
Yes, but I'm not at liberty to discuss them.
Perfectly
So
fine.
there is definitely movement, and there's stuff going on behind the scenes, but it is yeah. And I will definitely come on and talk. Oh, I will come on and talk whenever you want me to. But we do have plans and ideas, and also the idea is that what we're doing as a group is this is something that could be applied elsewhere, including us. So I'm not just saying people can go out and do their own movement. I'm saying also, yeah, you may see us exhibiting in your country.
Cool.
So there's talk of stuff going abroad, maybe going to America. Beyond that, I can't say, because we're still at early discussion stages. But that would be terrific if we could do something in America. And yeah, I'm looking forward to going back to America. You'll see, actually, if you buy the book, How to Start, you'll see that there are actually some letters that I wrote from New York when I came and visited. And it's just like, wow, this reminds me of the abstract expressionist biographies that I read. Jackson Pollock, and de Kooning and all that sort of
Mm.
lot. Yeah, it's kind of, wow. That's really, I'm really here. I'm standing on sacred soil, as it were. So yeah, it'd be great to go back to America and to do it in an exhibition. In the meantime, you can support me by buying the books through imperiumpress.org, which would be great. You can also get it through any other bookseller online. It's available through Amazon or Barnes and Noble or whatever. You can also find, and I'm going to push these, the author prints. So I've done some lino cut prints, which are all artists' original prints. So there's a limited number of them. Each is numbered and signed, maximum. So there's 50 copies. No more can be published or will be published. Each is signed by me, and each has got a unique number on it. So you can also buy those through imperiumpress.org. Have a look at the list. You may find your favorite author, or maybe your second favorite author, depicted in one of these prints.
Ah, my ducats, my money. Ah,
And they're not too expensive as well.
yeah. No, I'm sure they aren't. I'm sure they're wonderfully priced. One of the benefits of this movement is that people actually understand the value of money. Oh,
Mhm.
um, anyway, thank you for joining us, Mr. Adams. It was a pleasure. Please, for listeners, we will be having a writer by the name of where's his where does his email go? I will find that out. But point is, we will have an author who's working with Raconteur Press. His name is, excuse me, Scott Shad. He's got quite a few books. I think you'll enjoy it. Um, and also, there'll be more projects, my write streams, where I sometimes talk and where I sometimes just spend the entire time watching me write because I am no AI man. I am a real flesh and blood human being. See me bleed. Um, and see me run to the hospital because I'm a flesh and blood man and I'm bleeding. Uh, Other authors and artists have different projects, but it seems most of my friends are in between things or just working busy as bees as well. I look forward to all the new projects and